We're recording. Or online.
Oh, cool, all right. Tim and Chelsea and Representative Ledbetter is usually online.
Yeah, her LA, Ryan is on
Okay,
and Tim Brown's on.
she was before.
Tim's the fourth.
Oh, I guess-
And Ledbetter's person, Christine Blessinger.
oh,
Yeah.
yes, okay, great.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hey, Mike, just for clarification, Kate Ryan's with Chip. He's one of our interns.
Oh, I'm sorry, he's with who?
He's with Chip.
He's with Chip. Oh, I thought he was with Representative Ledbetter. Okay, I'm sorry.
So 3 online.
Well, you've got a representative from Chip, so that's not, yeah. You're correct. Wait a minute, well, because Chelsea's online all of it, so, okay, gotcha. I'm with you.
There you have a COVID stamped up.
What's stamped out? Oh, was that my assignment? I don't think that was my assignment. I'm pretty sure that wasn't the assignment.
I got well playing with a lot of people in Indianapolis during that time.
I
didn't you?
did.
Yeah.
Can't really talk to her.
All right, well, we'll call the meeting of the Low Barrier Homeless Shelter Task Force to order on November the 30th. As we should note, this meeting is being recorded. It will be available online and archived on the IUCDA website. We'll take attendance, and when we state attendance, state whether we're in person or whether we are joining virtually. So I'll start. My name is Jeff Bennett. I am the co-chair of the task force, and I am here in person.
Jack Sandlin, the state senator in person.
Rick Alvis in person.
Matt Rayburn with IHCDA in person.
Marion County Public Health Department, Karen Howley, in person.
And Chelsea, would you mind starting?
Sure. Chelsea Herring Cozy with Chip, remote.
Tim, are you on?
Hi, Tim Brown in person. Online, sorry.
And I will clarify that Tim is in person virtually. Chris, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. It's Chris Blessinger and I'm virtual.
Is there anyone
Cade
else?
Ryan. I'm a CHIP intern and virtual.
Good, all right. So we do not quite have a quorum, correct, Mike?
Correct.
But we don't actually have any action that is essential that we take by voting today. We may have minutes to adopt from a past meeting, but we can do that in one fell swoop. Should we have a quorum later in the meeting or at the December meeting, which will be the final meeting. There'll be some discussion in a bit about the date of that December meeting. We do have by statute, a final report that's due to the governor and to the legislative council by December 31st. And so we're contemplating meeting earlier in December, since essentially at that meeting, we would just be adopting, hopefully just adopting the final recommendations and the report itself, and then adopting those minutes so that we have everything buttoned up before the end of the year. So with that in mind, I sent at about 9 o'clock last night a draft of the report. And I hope folks had a chance to take a look at it. I don't expect that you've committed it all to memory or gave it super deep thought in the 12 hours that you had it. But would like to walk through its format, give a little bit of context why it looks the way it looks. And then maybe if it's okay, just kind of go recommendation by recommendation to see if there is at least consensus on inclusion and if there are things that need to be added or subtracted or modified. Then between today and the December meeting, we can do all of that. And we can do it, you know, some in person today, but we could certainly do it via electronic communication between now and adoption. So essentially, I adapted the formatting of the state housing task force report that convened over, I think, this late summer and fall, and modified that format for our use, essentially going meeting by meeting and giving a very brief recap of the high points of discussion or presentations or testimony given at those meetings. And then moved into kind of some overarching general principles as our conversation evolved over the course of the months, and then into what we discussed last meeting as a series of immediate or short-term recommendations that could be implemented as soon as, you know, Q1 of 2023 or sooner, and then longer-term actions that may require a little bit more time and a little bit more attention, either by the General Assembly or by local governments or both to implement over time. So if anybody has thoughts or concerns about the format, let me know. But I thought it worked pretty well for the housing task force, and we weren't vastly dissimilar from that. Fine.
I guess I had a question. We heard from the Lafayette person. Sorry, I'm spacing her.
Yeah, it's Jennifer Lake.
Yeah, Jim. So does Lafayette have a report on, you know, how they got to where they are that could be an addendum to this? And also, I know that the city contracted various housing facilities during the COVID. In fact, Rick, I think you managed
Yeah.
that project. Was there any kind of action or lesson learned, you know, from that exercise or?
So, Chelsea, I'll try to keep you from having to speak too much, but do you think the work of the Home Now Executive Committee would equate to an after action report on the hotel project?
Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by after action?
Well, post the pandemic housing experience, you know, were there lessons learned that came out of that would be beneficial as an addendum to this report?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are, I think, a handful of lessons learned when we were working in a kind of a housing command center model, when we had the hotels up and running, that have continued on. So we have a Home Now Executive Council made up of agency leadership that were involved in a lot of that non-congregate shelter work. And we have been talking a lot about how we sustain and scale a lot of the housing acquisition work that was done during the pandemic. There's a new housing acquisition team that is positioned at in partnership with Merchants Affordable Housing that are out there trying to source units, find new units, bring new inventory to work with rental assistance programs. There were a lot of landlord incentives that were brought to the table during COVID that now as the CARES money and ARPA money is kind of winding down, we're talking about how do we sustain some of those incentives. So there are probably, I mean, we could put together a one pager if that would be helpful, or something that could be attached to this that were lessons learned from COVID that we'd like to continue implementing and scaling.
If you wouldn't mind doing that, that's something that if we had by December 31st, when we have to submit, I think that's plenty of timing, I think.
Okay. Yeah, there were some big system changes that came out of that, just in terms of, again, acquisition, system navigation. You know, COVID really highlighted where we had some gaps that then we worked to fill, and now it's how do we sustain those?
And the numbers of people housed as a result, I've seen the bar chart of the past 5 years or so of housing, and because of that approach, we housed, I think, more than 500 additional households due to that work.
Yeah, we doubled, I mean, during kind of COVID and doing work in the ways that we did with the non-congregate shelters, the number of people housed out of coordinated entry doubled during that time period.
So, and then I'll reach out to Jennifer Layton in Lafayette and see what sort of strategic planning they did that led to their, and Matt, you may know, I don't know if you know the top of your head, but I know they had a community design strategy.
That's right, yeah.
That may give us some insight.
Sure. Well, I think as the administration receives the report,
Yeah.
and if they're thinking about legislation, I mean, I think that might be helpful to help create the roadmap and perhaps, suggested witnesses that might testify before the legislature as well.
Oh, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. And certainly the Lafayette concepts of shelter plus services beyond just the housing support services, but navigation and healthcare on site and permanent housing on site. Those appear through a series of recommendations within our reports.
That's what I was going to ask, Jeff. I mean, there may be a way to tease out just in the report that you've put together already. I mean, several of the recommendations I think came out of lessons learned during COVID. When we talk about that navigation center, when we talk about housing focused shelter, all of those were things that I think were really highlighted with the hotel models. And when we had multiple agencies coming together in one place on site, doing really coordinated work. So, I mean, I think a lot of the recommendations throughout this report were informed by those lessons learned, but if it's helpful, we can add some, data to that, or really maybe give some more context to how these recommendations are coming.
I think a one pager, I mean, I realize I'm creating work for you and others, but I think a one pager that summarizes the Home Now approach and gives a kind of high level data overview would be helpful for a few reasons. So anyone could go onto the website, the IHCDA website, pull the minutes from these meetings, and we certainly reference the availability of those minutes through this report, but it may not be as concise as a one pager would be, which could then kind of be a marketing tool for some of the work that we're just trying to do locally anyway.
Okay.
I've seen Greg's given a presentation on Home Now to like the Metropolitan Development Commission and others, and it's a pretty compelling slide deck. But there really isn't a summary of that slide deck in a way that is maybe a little glossy.
Yeah, we can pull that together.
Cool. Thank you.
So if I can just make a general comment on that outline here, Jeff, is my only thought. I think overall this is a good format to follow. I'm wondering, and I would certainly welcome the perspective of our elected officials who are part of this group, but would it make sense in some way to delineate out more, like, what are the actions that we think that local groups and stuff can just take on their own versus what are we specifically asking for state action, right? Because I think maybe if there was something a little clearer in here to say, here are the areas we think we need some type of funding or legislative action. So these are the recommendations we're asking the legislature to take out versus here are just things that we've self-identified we're going to start doing, with local nonprofits, et cetera.
I certainly tried to call out where we were requesting state funding. So like recommendation 5, 6, 8, and 14, 19, 21, maybe 20 if including the tax bill. So where I wasn't as clear, I think you're absolutely spot on, is on here are the things locals are.
Right.
Could do.
Here are things we've just identified as actions.
Yeah, we've laid out a
We're
couple.
going to move ahead.
We've laid out a couple things like that are Indianapolis specific. Indianapolis should do this with local funds, but we could be more clear on the.
I'm just trying to envision what
Yeah.
the reader will want to see, to say at the governor's office and at the legislature to say, okay, we understand these are things they've decided just to move forward with, and here's specifically what the ask is.
And at least where we're requesting the potential for state funding, that mirrors the language used in the Housing Task Force report on a couple of items that says state funding for X. And then what Tom and I have been working on is not a separate report, but a one-pager almost to go to legislators and say, okay, we're asking for state funding for item number 5. Here's how much and how it could flow and so one of my questions, I think for you and for Chris, and then for FSSA when we have an opportunity to speak, like you're the potential pass-throughs for that state money. How does that make you feel? If we're saying, hey, we want to do master leasing and we want the state to help us sort of kick off this concept, is it appropriate for those funds to flow through ICDA? Some are going to Indy and some are going to balance of state. It seems logical, but I'm not the practitioner.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think in general, we're open to, running new programs and initiatives, and, we just need to talk to understand kind of what the exact expectations on us are, but we're open to those conversations.
You're essentially being asked to now design a program.
Right.
And, we have some ideas about how it might work in Indianapolis and we have staff like thinking about structure, and we're talking to, property owners now about would you entertain this idea, but you may have a different view since you're serving 92 counties. Chris, your recommendation number 5 is trying to get at that issue that we started to touch on, at least initially at the last meeting, and I know you sent some data yesterday, but is it a question of funding for DOC that would help you solve for some of those really tough housing related needs, or is it something else that would be more helpful or as helpful?
I mean, of course, funding always helps with anything. I think we all know that, but I mean, honestly, it's just the availability, like where do they go? Because if they're not going home and they're not going to a mission or shelter, where else? I mean, we have those ones that we struggle that can't even go to a mission or shelter. So it's like, it's finding the appropriate place for them to be. So, the things that we've talked about through all of this, developing what that plan is. I mean, that would be the perfect opportunity for us, I guess. If that makes sense.
What kind of housing navigation services does the department already provide?
So what exactly do we do?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, every incarcerated individual that leaves the Department of Correction has somewhere to go. I mean, we never like, contrary to what you might see on TV or whatever, we don't open the door and say, hey, see ya, have a good life or whatever. That doesn't happen with us. Like everyone has an approved placement. So whether they're going home, whether they're going to a family, whether they're going to a friends, whether they're going to a mission or shelter, whether we're paying for them to go to a hotel because that's that's the only option that we have to help them. Though that is how we navigate that. So parole, we work very closely with our parole division. They help us. They help to find alternatives to if we're struggling with someone. Clearly we're working with the housing authority. I think we have our first bigger meeting with them. I think I want to say either next week or the week after, because I think I talked at the last meeting about you guys getting that grant funding and helping us so much with that. And so yeah, that's kind of how it goes. Does that answer the question?
Mostly, I guess what I'm getting at is if we're concerned about, and maybe Rick, I'm gonna put you on the spot, maybe it's a non-issue that we're making a bigger issue of it, but if there's an issue with existing shelter capacity, and some of those spots are people leaving their experience with the justice system into emergency shelter, is there a way to prevent that from happening? Like, is that an issue of housing supply, or is it an issue of financial support for rent, or is it something else?
It's all that. Yeah, because there is such a shortage of housing, that's why when you say available units, I assume you mean available beds. Well, all our beds are always full most of the time. And, we're on overflow right now, putting people on the floor. So our questions, we're always full for the most part, except in summertime. But, and in regards to the DOC, I know that we've had to send letters to DOC, accepting, you guys have to get, a letter, I guess, from us that we will accept them,
Right, to be the approved placement.
Yeah, and actually, for the last couple of years, we've actually had a staff and we're dedicated to going into prisons and helping sort of recruit people. Not that we need to recruit, but mainly those who are in addiction, who need further help, and to get them into our addiction program down by Bloomington.
So I think my wording in number 5 is probably not accurate, because Chris, what I'm hearing you saying is you're not necessarily releasing someone into a situation of homelessness because they're going into emergency shelter. I guess it's shelter homelessness.
Right, that's correct. Yeah. Everyone has an approved placement. Where that is, of course, is can be a problem, but they're all going somewhere. And, when you talk about funding too, if we had, because going back to like reentry, making sure that someone has a job prior to release, we do that too with some. So if they have a job and they've got a great, they save money in a reentry account and they've done what they need to do and they have money and we've got them a job. Again, it goes back to if we could find them an apartment to rent to them, because again, that's a struggle too, because places don't want to rent to us, which I've talked about before.
Yeah.
Let me reread the paragraph again too. Sometimes it takes me a couple times.
And we can connect, offline, not do it like right this second, but think about what would be the most helpful to the department And, you know, Rick, you think about it too, like if it's a non-issue for you, but my concern was because you're full, especially during these months. If you could be less full.
We'd love to be less full.
That's not terrible, it's not a terrible result.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I could say too, I mean, thanks to Rick, I didn't even realize you guys were even doing that. So that, I mean, that's awesome. Like, I didn't even know that.
Hey Matt, this is Chelsea. I know, I just saw Victoria sent a message out that IHCDA just released the home TBRA RFQ. And is doing something pretty cool by pairing the tenant-based rental assistance with some service dollars specific for people returning from incarceration. Do you see an opportunity? I guess two questions. One, do you see an opportunity here to, you know, try to expand statewide TBRA investment? And then two, I don't know how to ask this. Have you seen success with TBRA programs in terms of getting landlords to work with that specific program? Or has that been a challenge too?
Yeah, so we have dedicated our home TBRA program for a number of years now, specifically for individuals exiting incarceration or who were formerly incarcerated and have since become homeless. That has been a successful program. It's a relatively small program. But I would say that, yeah, Chelsea, probably the biggest challenge that our nonprofit providers that we select and give the grant dollars to is finding landlords locally to work with. So that is something that the nonprofits that we fund, they do landlord outreach and build those landlord relationships. And that can certainly be a barrier. That said, we've been able to use all the money every year. And so we are finding housing and getting the money spent.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's definitely the opportunity to expand TBRA. We usually can only make 2 or 3 awards a year. So that's, you know, just a couple of communities a year being served by TBRA. It is, you know, we've found it to be a successful model, you know, short term up to 24 months rental assistance. And the other challenge there is that right now, you know, what's unique about this RFQ, as you called out, is we are bringing some service dollars to the table. We're able to do that through some temporary ARP money we have. But traditionally, through home ARP, the traditional home program does not allow funding for services. So normally there is a service gap that the nonprofits have to find on their own. So, you know, there would potentially be opportunities to either get some additional state money just for TBRA broadly, so we could serve more areas. Or potentially to say, you know, use the existing home dollars for the short-term rental assistance, and then here's some state money to tie services to it.
Yeah. I wonder if that's an opportunity, Jeff, to just kind of address what we're talking about now, because I think we've seen some success with what I just mentioned, the partnership with Merchants Affordable Housing and the dedicated housing acquisition team, really finding those landlords that are willing to work with those reentering, particularly when there's services attached. That's what we hear more and more of, is if we know there's a case manager that's going to walk along this person for a little while, we're much more likely to rent to somebody who's reentering from incarceration, particularly one if we know that rent is covered for a little while, and that there's some services attached. And that has been a big selling point for landlords to work with populations that they haven't traditionally worked with. And going back to kind of Home Now, I mean, one of the first households that was housed under the Home Now initiative was somebody who was a registered sex offender, which we all know, I think on this call, is really challenging to find landlords that will rent to somebody who is a registered sex offender. But through that relationship building, through some guaranteed rental assistance for at least 12 months, and for those supportive services, the landlord was willing to work with the team. So I think there's something to build off of there, particularly with the TBRA program and attaching those services.
Yeah, so it may actually make sense to have more than one, perhaps, recommendation for Department of Corrections rather than rather than make it simply a matter of funding, there is some landlord recruitment that could be done, given some of the success of the Marion County model.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
We'll keep the money in there, Chris.
Okay, that's always great.
But spelling out, you know, rental assistance plus services for this special population, but then the need to seek landlords who would be willing to work on reentry housing specifically.
Yeah, I mean, that's perfect.
Give it some more thought, though, in the time between now and the December meeting, if you don't mind.
Yes, I will, definitely.
Jeff, as I read over this, in, in number 9, I'm just wondering, because sometimes I have a hard time wrapping my brain around this task force when we're talking about state, but yeah, we're talking about Indianapolis. You know, that's been very confusing for me, for somebody who's got ADD, you know, it's hard for me to comprehend this stuff. But I'm just wondering, I know that we're trying to set this with the state, correct? But we're using Indianapolis as kind of the boiling point or whatever for this. And so I know that in number 9, we talk about Horizon House being the one that's going to be like the intake center. But should there be something in this paragraph about extending an RFP to organizations? Because, you know, say Evansville comes in to play here and they want to do something, or Fort Wayne or whatever. You know, granted, probably Horizon House here locally might be the best one. I mean, I know Wheeler's not interested in this, but it just seems like to me an RFP ought to be somehow included in this, because I don't know if there's any other agencies in Indianapolis that would even, you know, be interested in this. I just think we gotta think statewide.
Well, and it's funny, because I thought about this exact same recommendation for this exact same reason. Because it may make sense in some communities where there isn't an organization that one might have to create it.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know if Lafayette is that example, because Lafayette Homeless Services has been around for 30, almost 35 years in some way, shape, or form. But there may be a county that wants to do this, that doesn't have that entity, it's a natural. So
We're at an advantage.
we are, so I am sensitive to what you're saying, and I think this one specifically needs some more work specific to have a little more statewide practicality.
So if you added something in there about an RFI, so if there were
Yeah,
individuals or organizations that were interested, who would put out a notice for, you know, request for information, you know, on a statewide basis? I mean, would it be the housing?
it could be man.
Okay.
Well,
There we go, crazy.
so one of the recommendations that we do have that is to promote the Supportive Housing Institute that ICD runs. And Bloomington came through the Supportive Housing Institute, said, hey, we want to do what we saw in Lafayette. We want to make it, you know, specific to Bloomington. We have a nonprofit partner, we have a developer.
And who is that? As I read this, I mean, we're in Bloomington. Are we referring to the Stride Center?
So this is a brand new project that's not yet been funded, that's in the works.
Yeah.
That will be a partnership with Beacon.
Beacon. And so that is a way to say, okay, if your community is interested in doing something, you know, we have a program that you can sign up for and go through and come out at the end, potentially with an application for financing. That may also be the first best way to identify who that hub organization might be.
But yeah, and I'm trying to think about, you know, smaller communities that you're talking about, and And it seems logical to me that maybe the county commissioners would be the entity to send information to for distribution.
That's a trustee, maybe too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd be the trustee.
Okay.
Two full trustees. I'll work on it.
That's sort of the trustee's mandate.
For emergency assistance, it is, yeah. Not, I mean, my experience, you don't often see someone released from DOC that's coming, to the township trustee just by virtue of the way the statute's written. Well, that's what I'm just saying.
And that's easy.
Yeah, it might be something that you say should be reviewed. Emergency assistance for homeless people or those coming out of DOC that don't have a permanent residence. I mean, I can see where, if you're dropping a lot of people in heavy metropolitan areas, that might be a bigger burden. But you also have more resources in the heavy metropolitan areas than you do in the smaller. And Lord knows that some of these smaller township trustees are sitting on big banquets.
Well, Matt, continuing with homework assignments for ACDA. Some of 11, 12, 13 have an IACDA, potential impacts. This 12 is written with Marion County in mind because we've been discussing a moving on type effort for most of the 7 years I've been in this position. And we've never quite figured it out yet. And I don't know if it's something that's applicable to the units across the state.
We actually do have a limited preference for moving on in our voucher administrative plan. It has a limited number of vouchers per year for individuals who are ready to exit permanent supportive housing to get on this limited preference voucher to go and just move into other rental housing around the state. So we have that model. That's something we can certainly talk with you and IHA about locally to see if there's a way to implement something similar.
Chelsea, would that be helpful to us, or are we hung up on, the willingness of our permanent supportive housing providers to participate?
No, I do think that would be helpful. I mean, I think there's two parts. I think having some dedicated housing choice vouchers with the move on preference is key, and we've not really had that with our housing authority yet. And then we're already working with service providers on kind of that move on assessment. That's the second piece of how do you assess service needs of folks to really determine who's ready for move on. And I do think there's an appetite with providers now to do that. And there are some conversations happening about what that service needs assessment could look like.
Oh, that's good. That's good news.
So yeah, I think 12 is very doable. It's something to engage in conversations around. I mean, 13 is just something we gotta do anyway, right?
Right.
It's get all the HP vouchers fully utilized. I think that's well underway in most areas of the state. So that makes sense. On number 11, I think the answer is that there's really just not much vacancy in existing supportive housing, and any supportive housing that we fund is mandated to only take referrals from coordinated entry anyway. So anytime there is a vacancy, they're immediately going to coordinated entry, and we see that a supportive housing unit stays vacant for less than 30 days anywhere in the state before someone is back in it. So I don't know that there'd be much to inventory there to show vacancy.
We felt like we had some in Marion County weirdly, and so that's, I stuck it in there to make sure that we weren't.
It's something we started to talk through and try to figure out if there's something going on. It's a little different, but.
But I also see that connected to the move on strategy, right? Creating,
Yeah.
more flow in supportive housing, and a move on strategy would really help open up. Yes, we want to have full utilization, but it's also creating some flow.
And all of this is to say like, if we're sheltering people, whether it's at Wheeler or in units that we create through an integrated approach like Lafayette, we still want people to get hung up. And
That's one of the things that, and I know my team expressed to me about coordinated entry is the fact that it's sometimes so rigid, it doesn't allow for a whole lot of maneuvering and to really help people at times when they really need help and to make referrals and stuff. And I know my team's expressed that to me about the coordinated entry. So it seems like we've got to make sure it stays flexible. Got to stay flexible.
How do you do that? How do you make it, how you provide for more flexibility?
I don't have the answer to that one, Jack. I can get back with you on it, but I mean, that's a good question. How do you provide it? And I'm sure my team's got the answer. They're the ones that's in it every day.
Yeah,
Experiencing
I
it.
mean, I think we'd be curious, at least
Sure.
locally, to follow up on that conversation. I tend to ask a lot of questions about coordinated entry at our Blueprint Council meetings. And so knowing sort of specific instances where staff, it's like, if I only had some flexibility here, I could do this.
Right.
Right. I think that would inform
Yeah.
potential, changes to that
I
system.
agree. Yeah.
And to that end, there are a number of coordinated entry refinements happening right now in Indianapolis to address some of those issues. So Rick, I would just say making sure that your staff are plugged into those work groups.
I think they are, Chelsea.
Yeah.
At least I can find that out, but I know I got one on Chip's board, but I'm sure that we got a couple serving out there.
Yeah, because I agree,
You
there's
probably know-
got to be
You probably
some,
know better than I do.
yeah.
Well, this very topic has come up related to people experiencing unsheltered homelessness or people who are experiencing chronic homelessness. Like sometimes they're not appearing high on any list for housing. And like, if that's the
Yeah.
case, why?
I think that's some of it,
You know,
Jeff. Yeah.
But if you've got people that are sort of stuck in shelter, that's a problem too.
Yeah.
And, like, we need to solve for both.
Yeah.
Some of the, auspices for this task force was to try to, and I tried to lay that out at the very beginning, was to understand and try to fill gaps if there are, or people who aren't going to Wheeler, choosing not to, or not going for other reasons. Is there an intervention on the emergency front that would serve them? And if so, let's figure that out. But in any case, all of these roads need to lead to housing as quickly as
I've always said, if I was gonna be, of course, I'm stepping down after 30-some years. If I was gonna be involved here in Indianapolis for another 30 years, this would be one of my number one issues, is trying to find and build more units. Because from my experience at Wheeler, I mean, we're at capacity all the time, because we don't have anywhere to refer them to.
We've talked about supply and tried to lay out some recommendations to increase supply. Chelsea and Tim, number 15 is one that the two of you have been working on. And I don't know if I am anywhere close to accurately depicting what you're working on.
Yeah, we can dig into that a little bit more. Tim has set up some really great conversations with a number of people to really understand what's already happening around talent pipeline development. Community Health Network has done some great work with Ascend Indiana to bring more behavioral health specialists to train and keep them here through the Behavioral Health Institute. We just learned Eskenazi is embarking on a similar initiative with Ascend to train, I think, 85, train and hire 85 behavioral health specialists over the next couple years. So we were trying to figure out how to kind of build on the momentum that's already happening, and continue some state investment there. And to add not just behavioral health specialists that are clinically trained, but case managers as well that really focus on housing stability. So we talked to Ascend, and Tim, please jump in. We talked to Ascend about kind of building on what's already been done, and then, how could we scale that and make it a little more specific to the homeless service sector. And so they put together a very general draft budget of what that investment could look like based on the work that they've done with the two healthcare systems. So what would be helpful, Jeff or Tim? Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think the big thing is that Ascend is willing to continue the work on determining what skill sets are actually needed to work with the homeless sector, and whether we need credentialing, whether we need MSWs, whether we need people with bachelor's degrees, but working on that whole talent pipeline is going to be very essential to service deliverables. And so I think that at the least, we definitely need to continue that type of work so that we can get a better understanding as to how we're going to make sure that we have professionals to work in this area. And so I don't know if you want to emphasize that piece more. I know that Employ Indy said that they had some dollars to do a little bit of that work, but I think that to really get the total perspective, I think we're going to need to enlist Ascend to do a deeper dive in really mapping out how we're gonna have that talent pipeline constructed so that we can be helpful to this whole project.
So I think Chelsea told me that we have some money in Marion County through DMHA to do some of this work, but that there may be a need for additional funds. But it seemed like a really nominal amount with a potentially high return on that investment. I mainly want to make sure that I'm accurately reflecting the ask in this recommendation. And if my word choice doesn't do that, then let me know.
Okay.
And secondly, is this applicable statewide? Or is this work more specific to central Indiana or Marion County? And then recommendation 22, the very last one, is it's really simply not duplicating work. It's suggesting that the state implement one of the recommendations from the Behavioral Health Commission, which is a tuition reimbursement for students that come through and go into this field. Like, let's create a talent pipeline that way too. So I guess make sure that I'm saying what should be said on number 15. And we can refine the dollar amount that we need to put in to the hands of the legislators so that we get that right. And then let me know if there's a statewide applicability to that recommendation or not.
Yeah, Jeff, I think we can look at the language in 15. I think it's really trying to capture the continuum of the talent pipeline all the way from behavioral health specialists to case managers to peer support specialists. And so what Marion County has some funding for is a 3-year initiative to train, certify, and pay salaries for peer support specialists for 3 years through some, again, time-limited funding from DMHA. The Corporation for Supportive Housing laid the foundation for the role of peer support specialists in the homeless service sector. And so there's some great work to build off of there. But it's really about that continuum of talent. And it's not just behavioral health specialists that we need to be investing in to bring more talent to the sector. So we can play with the language a little bit just to capture that continuum. And Matt, I would think this is pretty applicable across the state too, as we talk more and more about staff turnover and trying to recruit and retain staff across homeless services statewide. Peers are being utilized across the state, and I would think this would be more than just a Marion County need.
Jeff, I know that, as the Indiana University, I'll call it Indiana University Indianapolis, looks at separation from Purdue University and remaking that. I know that this is something that's on their radar for the schools to talk about how to emphasize the health tracks and even to think about work study programs that may not be there at this point. But they're really focused on, the central Indiana community as they look at this and try to make unique statements. And I've sat in a couple of those meetings. I don't know if Tim was in that meeting or not, but I think that along with the Ivy Tech and as we look at some education stuff in Indiana and more workforce ready, I think that we'll have some entry level workers that haven't been there in the past.
Yeah, for us, like creating sources of funding to provide the services is important, but having people to deliver them has become more of an issue lately.
But it should be reported somehow.
Which one?
Number 16.
Yeah.
Because it's not an operating model in Bloomington from what Ed said, but it's being developed.
Correct.
Oh, this leads it.
That's true.
This leads to believe that there's an operating, and I'm
Yeah.
trying to think what it is.
Yeah, no, you're
Something
right.
right
You're
there.
right. You're right.
It just started about a year ago.
Yeah, it's really the operating model that exists in Lafayette and it's
Yeah.
being developed. And I will fix that. Thank you. I may just omit Bloomington. Matt, I tried to rework 18, 19, and 20 to maybe be more concise, but I'm still not sure if I am getting it right. I mean, 18 is pretty straightforward, but I guess 19 to 20 are two that. Is it too fine of a point to ask the General Assembly to create a state tax credit specifically for supportive housing?
No, I mean, I think that's what we're wanting, right? So. If we have the model to show that the state can create state housing tax credits, the recent one, but that's all about bonds, workforce housing. So this would say, let's use a similar model that's specific to supportive.
And should we make it applicable to all the tax credit programs or would it automatically be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we see most of the supportive housing work being done through the 9% program, so I think definitely making it applicable to be paired with 9% is important. And that's really what the institute ties to. So that's probably the biggest, focus. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions at this point from task force members or certainly open to suggestion and do not have right of authorship, so. I did take notes though on this discussion, and you go back and revise.
I was just taking it easy on you.
Yeah.
You guys are great.
My only suggestion would be that, if you send us additional drafts, maybe you put a footer on here that says this draft of the change,
Yeah.
this will be number 2 or number 3.
That's a great idea. I put that in the
Talking
folder.
to a guy that does a lot of drafts.
I saved them all with different names, and that's a terrible way to do it. Well, so certainly take time post-meeting, if you have additional thoughts, feel free to share. I will work on revising ASAP, because I would like to suggest that we try to meet as a group the week of December the 12th. Perhaps Wednesday the 14th, if that works, but again, would defer to the groups
The
available.
14th doesn't work for me because we have a building dedication in Bloomington, we're opening a new facility down there.
We're gonna wanna shoot for a quorum for that meeting, so perhaps an email chain where we can check
Yeah.
availability.
Let's do that. And see off the bat, if there's anything that sticks out on my calendar, it's bad. But
Hey, Jeff, can I ask one more question?
yes,
Going back to some of the discussion with Christine about reentry and how do we incentivize more landlords? Matt, I know the state has had a landlord guarantee program, kind of a risk mitigation fund. Is that something that you've seen some success with and that could be an opportunity to fund through this recommendation or ask for support through these recommendations?
Yeah, I think the model definitely works. The current one is funded through DMHA and is for a very specific target population, so we've just not seen a lot of use for it. But the concept of the mitigation reserve, I think it's easy to implement, and there's a lot of national data that shows you very rarely would need to actually access the funds from the reserve. And even though we haven't assisted that many people directly through the reserve, we've had over 100 landlords across the state sign up and say they would take people who were covered by the reserve. So we know that landlords are saying this model is something that would entice us to house a, quote, difficult household. So yeah, I think to the extent that a mitigation reserve funding could come that would be maybe a little more broadly applicable, less prescriptive than the current target population, that'd be great. Again, we know that there's landlords out there who are saying, yeah, if you guarantee that if that tenant causes damage or runs away and has unpaid rent, that you'll step in and cover it.
Yeah.
They're interested.
yeah,
Okay.
Chelsea, I think that's one that we could combine with like the landlord recruitment recommendation.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Because it's not just recruiting, it's incentivizing. So, yeah, so as we were beginning to discuss, so we do have the last meeting of the task force is currently scheduled for the 21st of December. I'm gonna be out of town that week. So that's why I was hoping we could move it up to the prior week. Maybe we could just do a poll or something.
We'll formulate 3 choices and circulate to the club.
Cool.
See what they're gonna say.
And then, but before that, I will compile the comments, make revisions, send out a draft number 2 that is marked draft number 2. And then we'll go from there. Tom McGowan texted just a moment ago, and said he was, hung up at a work-related meeting today, but he has comments as well that I'll incorporate.
I can be there December 21st.
I mean, you can meet if you want.
Got it on my calendar.
Did you say the 7th?
I think the week of the 12th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because the week of the 19th, I'll be out. So we'll circulate some options
They're
and
gonna, I'm out of town, but, okay.
see if we get a quorum in any one of the three options you said, Mike, and then we'll take it.
Maybe 4 options.
Yeah. All right, well, if there are no other comments, stay tuned for an email about meeting dates and revisions to and adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Right, thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Lunch meeting. Is that you work on the lunch meeting, yeah.
I don't know, I got to work on some legislation, and not everybody's happy.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Take care. Take care. Good night.
Take care.
Aaron, always good to see you.
Now it is.
Yeah.